Chadwick Boseman. When Chadwick Boseman passed away in August 2020, the world was absolutely shocked because no one knew he had been battling colon cancer for 4 years. At just 43 years old, he had already become a global icon, best known for playing King T'Challa in Black Panther. What made his tragic death so unbelievable was the fact that during the exact years he was filming blockbuster after blockbuster, he was also quietly going through surgeries and chemotherapy. Fans later learned that movies like Marshall, 21 Bridges, Da 5 Bloods, and even Avengers Endgame were all shot while he was fighting stage 3 cancer that eventually advanced to stage 4. The secrecy around his illness made everything even harder to believe. People remembered photos of him from earlier in 2020, where he looked much thinner, and fans had assumed he was preparing for a new role. Some even made jokes online calling him Crack Panther, not realizing they were mocking a man undergoing life-saving treatments. The truth hit much harder when it came out that his weight loss wasn't for Hollywood at all. It was because of cancer. Friends and co-stars later revealed that he never complained about his condition, never let it stop him from working, and never used it as an excuse. He went to set, gave his all, and then went home to deal with treatments in private. Even looking back at his career before Black Panther, it becomes really clear that Boseman had been building something bigger than himself. He played real-life black icons like Jackie Robinson in 42, James Brown in Get On Up, and Thurgood Marshall in Marshall. Then came T'Challa, the role that made him an international symbol of pride and representation. Millions of kids finally saw a black superhero leading the biggest movie franchise in the world. But off-screen, he was fighting a battle that would have broken most people. Bernie Mac. When news broke in August 2008 that Bernie Mac had died, the world stopped because nobody expected a man who had just been on movie sets and comedy stages to be gone at only 50. For years, people knew him as the fearless Chicago comic who made a career out of saying the things other comedians were scared to say. What most didn't know was that behind the laughter he was carrying sarcoidosis, a rare disease that attacks the lungs and weakens the immune system. He never liked talking about it, often brushing off questions about his health because he didn't want to be seen as fragile. That silence meant fans were completely blindsided when a simple case of pneumonia quickly spiraled out of control and landed him in intensive care. Doctors worked around the clock, but the disease made his body too weak to fight back. Reports later said he suffered cardiac arrest, and within days, he was gone. For fans, the shock wasn't just about losing another celebrity. It was about losing Bernie, the same man who had fought his way out of the south side of Chicago, the man who turned his raw pain into comedy that filled arenas, and the man who made millions feel like they knew him personally every time he stepped on stage or on screen. His death broke hearts across the industry, with fellow comedians like Steve Harvey and Cedric the Entertainer breaking down as they paid tribute to their friend, and President Barack Obama himself acknowledging what Bernie meant to the culture. The Bernie Mac Show wasn't a regular average sitcom. It was different, showing the tough love and hard truths of raising kids in a black household, and it won awards because it felt so real. In movies, he could play the funny uncle, the hustler, or stand toe-to-toe with Hollywood's biggest stars like Clooney and Pitt in Ocean's 11. Sadly, a disease most people had never even heard of suddenly took him away. Michael Clarke Duncan. Michael Clarke Duncan's death was unlike almost anyone else's in Hollywood. Before he ever stepped in front of a camera, he was a bodyguard for big names like Will Smith and the notorious B.I.G. In fact, it was after Biggie's murder in 1997 that Duncan decided to step away from that dangerous line of work and give acting a serious shot. He was already a really big guy at 6 feet 5 inches and over 300 pounds. So Hollywood typecast him at first as a bouncer, bodyguard, or tough guy in the background. But then came The Green Mile in 1999, and everything changed overnight. Cast as John Coffey, the gentle giant on death row with a mysterious gift, Duncan went from being a side character actor to an Academy Award nominee. After The Green Mile, Duncan became a recognizable face in blockbuster after blockbuster. He took on roles in movies like Armageddon, Planet of the Apes, The Scorpion King, and even lent his deep voice to animated hits like Kung Fu Panda and Brother Bear. Directors loved him because he could intimidate on screen. Off screen, he was known for that same kindness. Fans who met him always described him as soft-spoken, humble, and generous. a huge contrast to the tough guy characters he often played. But in July 2012, Duncan suffered a massive heart attack at his Los Angeles home. His fiancée, reality star Omarosa Manigo, performed CPR and managed to keep him alive long enough for doctors to stabilize him in the hospital. For a while, it started to seem like he might recover, but complications from the heart attack lingered. 2 months later, on September 3, 2012, Michael Clark Duncan died at the age of 54. The news shocked everyone in Hollywood because just the year before, he had been a lead on The Finder, and casting directors were still lining him up for new projects. Friends even said he had recently made lifestyle changes, cutting back on red meat and focusing on health, which made the heart attack even harder to process. Reports later revealed he had been struggling with high blood pressure for some time, and that led to the end of the life of a man with a very promising future. Cicely Tyson. For decades, Cicely Tyson had been one of the very few actresses in Hollywood who refused to take roles that made black women look weak or unintelligent. Back in the 1960s and 70s, when most scripts offered nothing but maids and background characters, she walked away from them even if it meant not working for months. That gamble paid off in 1972 when she starred in Sounder, a movie that showed her as a tough sharecropper's wife holding her family together. The role earned her an Oscar nomination, and suddenly, everyone in Hollywood knew who Cicely Tyson was. Just 2 years later, she went even further in the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, where she played a woman aging from her 20s to over 100 years old in one film. Watching her transform like that shocked audiences and critics, and it won her 2 Emmys. At this point, she was no longer just another actress. She became the woman who proved that black women could carry a story and command the screen. She also kept finding ways to reinvent herself for younger audiences. In the 1990s, she was showing up in Fried Green Tomatoes and Hoodlum. In the 2000s and 2010s, she suddenly appeared in Tyler Perry films, and then even more people saw her in How to Get Away with Murder as Viola Davis's mother. Then, at 96 years old, she dropped her memoir, Just As I Am. It was released just 2 days before her death. Fans who opened the book after hearing the news realized they were reading her final words, almost like she knew the timing. That made her death feel even heavier, because it wasn't just losing an actress. It was like the voice of history itself going silent. The strange part is, nobody really knew how sick she was. No cancer battle was announced, and no long hospital reports came out. One day she was promoting her book, and then suddenly she was gone. It left people to focus not on an illness, but on the fact that her career had stretched across more than 70 years, with dozens of honors, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom and an honorary Oscar. Gregory Hines. Gregory Hines was the kind of performer people thought would be around for longer than he was. He had that smooth confidence that never seemed to run out, whether he was acting in a movie or cracking jokes in interviews. But in August 2003, it became a headline that he had died of liver cancer at only 57 years old. He hadn't made his illness public, so to fans and even some close friends, it felt like he had vanished overnight. 1 week, he was still showing up on screen with that famous smile. And then suddenly, the headlines said he was gone. People who knew him knew he wasn't just some actor who could dance. He was a kid who had been raised in that impressive rhythm. At just 5 years old, Gregory and his brother Maurice were already touring nightclubs with their father in an act called Hines, Hines and Dad. Those smoky club nights trained him the hard way. And by the time Hollywood started paying attention, he was already a master. In the 80s, he changed the image of tap dancing with movies like White Nights and Tap. No more dusty old routines and tuxedos. Gregory made tap look cool, combining it with funk, jazz, even a little hip-hop energy. Starring alongside Billy Crystal in Running Scared, winning a Tony Award on Broadway, even popping up in hit shows like Will and Grace. He had proven himself in every lane. Dancer, actor, singer, comedian. But while all that was happening on stage and screen, something completely different was happening in private. He had been quietly fighting cancer, but he kept it to himself. There were no news leaks, no photos of him looking frail, no pity from the public. He never let the world see him sick. So after his death, fans and fellow performers admitted they never saw it coming. Diahann Carroll. In 1968, Diahann Carroll starred in Julia, the first American TV series to show a black woman in a non-stereotypical role, a professional nurse raising her son alone. Millions of viewers tuned in every week, and it made her one of the most recognizable faces in television. But Carol wasn't new to the spotlight then. She had already made history in 1962, winning a Tony Award for No Strings, becoming the first black woman ever to do so. In the years that followed, she built a career that crossed every medium. Films like Claudine, for which she was nominated for an Oscar, glamorous roles on Dynasty, and countless appearances on stage and in concerts. She was elegant, stylish, and outspoken in ways that made her both admired and criticized, but she never stopped pushing forward. Behind all that show business glamour, though, Carol was facing a long fight that the public didn't always see. In the late 1990s, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She went public with her diagnosis not to get sympathy, but to raise awareness, especially for black women who she pointed out often weren't given enough attention in cancer research or medical care. She underwent surgery and treatment, and for years she continued performing, showing up at events, doing interviews, and working in film and television. To many fans, it didn't look like she was slowing down at all, but privately, she was navigating the ups and downs of cancer treatments. She became a spokesperson for early detection and encouraged women to take charge of their health, using her platform to bring a difficult subject into mainstream conversation. By the 2000s, she was seen as both a living legend and a survivor, someone who had faced Hollywood racism, personal challenges, and serious illness, yet still carried herself with grace. Then in 2019, news broke that she had passed away at 84 from complications of breast cancer, and fans realized just how long she had been quietly fighting the disease while still working. Samuel Monroe Jr. Samuel Monroe Jr. grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and instead of just watching the streets around him, he turned them into art. In the 1990s, he became a familiar face in films that captured the raw reality of black life in America. He played O-Dog's friend in Menace to Society, showed up in Set It Off, and took roles in Tales from the Hood and The Players Club. These weren't small background parts either. Monroe had the look, the energy, and the grit that made him believable as the kid next door caught in violence, or the sharp hustler trying to survive. People who grew up watching those movies know his face instantly, even if his name didn't always get the same spotlight as the bigger stars around him. What many didn't realize until later was that he was Nipsey Hussle's cousin, and this made his connection to LA and its culture even stronger. For years after those films, he was still active, appearing in projects tied to hip-hop and independent black cinema. He popped up in Tales from the Hood 2 decades later, showing that he was still respected enough to be brought back. But while he kept working, Hollywood never gave him the same push as some of his co-stars. Instead, he had to grind on his own, taking roles in smaller films, music videos, and projects that didn't make national headlines. What made his story even more striking is how his personal life and family ties kept him deeply linked to LA culture. Fans of Nipsey Hussle later found out they were blood relatives, and people started to see Monroe's career in a new light, as part of the same story of resilience and survival that Nipsey represented in music. Then came the news that he had died from stomach cancer in 2022. He was only 54. His daughter confirmed his death online, and fans started to revisit clips of his most memorable scenes, sharing them across social media as proof of how much he had been part of their upbringing. Lou Rawls. Lou Rawls had one of those voices you couldn't mistake. Smooth and deep enough to make a whole room stop talking the moment he started singing. But what a lot of people forget is that besides being a singer, he was also an actor who managed to carve out a second career on TV screens. In the 70s and 80s, you could spot him in films like Angel Angel, Down We Go, Leaving Las Vegas, and guest spots on shows from Baywatch Nights to The Big Valley. Although his acting career never reached the same level as his music, directors kept bringing him in because he had that rare mix of charm and authority that just worked on camera. What made Rawls' later years pretty surprising was how long he managed to keep performing despite his health problems. By the early 2000s, he was quietly battling lung and brain cancer, but he kept working. He was acting, appearing at charity events, and even doing TV voiceovers. Fans would even see him show up and not realize he was sick at all because he refused to present himself as weak or fading. Then in 2006, it was revealed that Rawls was in the hospital, and almost immediately after, tributes started coming in even before he passed because people knew how big his influence had been. He was only 72, and it felt like he still had more to give. The man who had started out as a gospel singer in Chicago had ended up with over 60 albums, 3 Grammys, acting credits across film and TV, and a charity telethon that raised hundreds of millions for the United Negro College Fund. His death from cancer wasn't only about losing such a famous voice. It felt like the end of an entire era where black entertainers had to fight twice as hard to cross over into mainstream Hollywood and music, and Rawls had been one of the few to actually do it on both sides. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston's death in 2012 was so unexpected because she was still considered one of the greatest voices of all time. At 48 years old, she was found in the bathtub of her Beverly Hills hotel room, just hours before she was set to attend a pre-Grammy party hosted by Clive Davis, the man who first discovered her. The official cause was accidental drowning, but cocaine use and heart disease were listed as contributing factors. It wasn't the first time her health had been questioned. For years, tabloids had shown pictures of her looking thin, fragile, and a shadow of the powerhouse singer who had once belted out, "I Will Always Love You," in The Bodyguard. Those images told a story fans didn't want to believe. But by 2012, it was clear that Whitney's voice and body had been pushed to their breaking point. Strangely, just the night before she died, she had been seen at rehearsals for the Grammy event, looking sweaty, disoriented, and out of sorts. Eyewitnesses said she was acting really strange, jumping in and out of the pool at her hotel, and even clashing with people around her. Hours later, her assistant found her lifeless in the tub, and emergency responders couldn't revive her. The detail that shocked people most was how disturbingly similar her death felt to later events. 3 years later, her only daughter, Bobby Christina Brown, was also found unresponsive in a bathtub and later died. For Whitney, the hotel bathroom became the scene of one of music's biggest tragedies, a place where years of pressure, substance abuse, and personal struggles finally caught up to her in the most sudden way possible. By the time she died, Whitney had sold over 200 million records worldwide, starred in box office hits, and won 6 Grammys. But all of that was often overshadowed by highly publicized drug use and interviews that revealed just how much she was struggling. Clarence Williams III. Clarence Williams III's death in June 2021 at 81 years old didn't make the same global headlines as younger stars, but for generations of fans, he was unforgettable. He broke through in the late 1960s as Link Hayes on the Mod Squad, one of the first shows to put a cool, smart, tough black man at the center of primetime television. The afro, the shades, and the attitude made him an icon during a time when TV rarely gave black actors serious roles. But his career wasn't just about one part. He kept showing up in surprising places, from playing Prince's troubled father in Purple Rain to drug kingpins in 1990s crime dramas, giving every role some menace and vulnerability that quickly stood out. So when news came that he had died from colon cancer, many fans couldn't believe that this man who always seemed larger than life had been sick at all. What made his career so unusual was the way he managed to avoid being boxed in, even when Hollywood wanted to typecast him. After the Mod Squad ended, a lot of actors from that era disappeared, but Clarence kept reinventing himself. He popped up in films like Sugar Hill with Wesley Snipes, The General's Daughter with John Travolta, and Half-Baked, where he played a hilariously unhinged villain. Younger audiences who didn't know him from the 1960s suddenly discovered him through cult classics, and directors loved his ability to shift between serious drama and over-the-top characters. By the 2000s, he was still working steadily in movies and TV guest roles, long after many of his peers had been erased from the screen. That made his passing hit harder because he had been present for so long across different eras of black entertainment. Friends and colleagues later said that Clarence had kept his health struggles very private, just like Chadwick Boseman had done years before. Which of these actors was your favorite? If you enjoyed this video, then hit the like button and share it with everyone you know who would love to see it. If you'd like more videos like this, then subscribe to our channel and hit the notification icon so you don't miss our next videos.